The moment I woke up in that sterile hospital room, the first thought that tore through me wasn't the pain, it was the absence. No familiar voices, no rushing footsteps, just the quiet, heavy silence that screamed louder than any siren outside. I was lucky to be alive, they said. Lucky. But luck didn't explain why my parents didn't show up. Not even once. 4 days went by like that. 4 days of me waiting for the two people who were supposed to be my anchor. They never came. I remember the nurses telling me they called them several times. My emergency contacts, they said, my parents. But their reaction? Cold, indifferent. Like I was some inconvenient problem instead of their daughter caught in a nightmare. That indifference wrapped around me like a vice, squeezing harder with every hour I spent staring at the cracked ceiling tiles. And then, when I finally thought maybe they were just caught up in something urgent, I heard about the ceremony. My brother's award ceremony. My parents' priority over my survival. They'd been preparing, celebrating, and applauding for him while I was lying broken, barely clinging to life. It wasn't jealousy that stung. It was betrayal, pure and raw. I'm Jonas, by the way, 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the shadow in my family's story. My brother Roman, the golden child, the one with the charm, the perfect smile, the unstoppable rise. Me? I was the backdrop, the afterthought, the failure in their eyes. Roman was born strong, healthy, and instantly beloved, the shiny star in my parents' eyes. I was the forgotten kid, the scrawny one they barely glanced at. And as the years passed, their favoritism didn't just shape our childhood, it tore it apart. Roman was a spoiled bully, turning every day into a battle for attention. My parents? They enabled him, spoiling his tantrums, excusing his cruelty, ignoring my pain. My victories were met with silence, or worse, comparisons that made me feel invisible. I learned early on that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be enough. But I wanted out. I dreamed of escape, of proving them wrong. College was supposed to be my salvation, a scholarship to a prestigious university far away from the stifling shadows of my family's judgment. But even that was a battlefield. My parents refused to let me go. Not because they doubted me. No, it was because Roman couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding where he hadn't. They pressured me into attending a local college instead. To keep the peace, they said. To protect Roman's fragile ego. So, I lied. I pretended to stay in the dorms while secretly attending the university I'd earned a place at. I built a double life, balancing stolen moments of freedom with the guilt that gnawed at me every day. It wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. But Roman's shadow always loomed. The worst blow came not from my parents, but from Jacob, my brother's name, the golden brat who had grown into an arrogant man. One Christmas, after years of me supporting his family, paying for his kids' summer camp, school supplies, even mortgage payments, he told me I wasn't welcome anymore. Not here, not this year. This is no place for losers, he sneered, as my mom stood silently by, her eyes cold, her loyalty clear. I stood there, stunned, the bags of gifts in my hands suddenly feeling heavier than ever. They had spent years leaning on me, using me, taking from me without a second thought. And now, I was the loser? The expendable one? Something inside me shattered. But instead of breaking, I walked away. Not just from Christmas that year, but from the family I thought I knew. In the days that followed, I kept replaying every slight, every betrayal, every moment I'd ignored the creeping sense of being used. My parents weren't just absent that day in the hospital, they had chosen their side, chosen Roman, chosen appearances over blood. And now they expected me to bail Jacob out of his mess, to finance their failures? No, I was done. But anger isn't a clean thing. It doesn't just burn and fade. It corrodes, seeps into your bones. I wanted revenge. Not the kind that destroys families overnight, but the slow kind. the kind that makes them realize they lost me when it was too late. So I started watching, listening, gathering pieces. Jacob's arrogance was his weakness. His lies, his debts, the way he kept pretending his failures weren't real. And my parents? They hid behind their perfect facades, afraid to admit that the golden boy was just as flawed as the rest of us. That Christmas, I didn't just walk away from my family's home. I walked into a new reality, one where I was the one who set the terms. And from that cold, quiet hospital room to the burning sting of exclusion on Christmas morning, I vowed I wouldn't be invisible anymore. Not to them, not ever again. Leaving my family behind wasn't easy, not because I loved them, but because I'd been raised to believe their approval was the only thing that mattered. And suddenly, I was cast out, unmoored in a sea of bitterness and broken promises. But the moment I slammed the door on that Christmas morning, a strange clarity began to settle in. Jacob's words echoed in my head, "No place for losers." Funny, considering how many times I'd been the one bailing him out, covering his messes like a fool. I wasn't the loser. They were. Losers in decency, in loyalty, in basic human respect. Yet beneath the anger, there was something darker stirring in me. A hunger not just for revenge, but for recognition. I wanted to make them all see, feel, what it was like to be invisible. I started small, cutting ties that had been strangling me for years, canceling the payments I'd been making for Jacob's family, ignoring calls from my parents who suddenly wanted to talk things through. I let the silence grow louder than any apology they might have offered. But silence wasn't enough, not for me. One cold evening, sitting in my cramped apartment, I pulled out the first of many old family photos. Pictures where I was always in the background, smiles forced, eyes resigned. I thought about every birthday party I wasn't invited to, every achievement ignored. The bitterness was poison, but it was mine, and I swallowed it gladly. Then came the calls. At first, just a text from my mother, an awkward, "We miss you," with no explanation. I ignored it. Next, a voicemail from my father, voice trembling with a mix of guilt and frustration. I played it once, then deleted it. But Jacob was the worst. He kept texting me with thinly veiled threats and fake apologies. "We're family," he said. "You'll come back." I knew better. Family wasn't blood, it was loyalty, and they had none for me. The turning point was when I got the call from an anonymous number. The voice on the other end was hushed but urgent. "Jonas, you need to know what's really going on. Your brother's in deep, bigger trouble than you think." I was suspicious. Was this some cruel joke or a chance to finally get the truth? I agreed to meet. At a rundown diner on the edge of town, a stranger slid into the booth across from me. She had sharp eyes and a wary smile. "My name's Elise," she said. "I worked with Jacob, and he's been hiding a lot." She pulled out a folder thick with documents, unpaid debts, shady business deals, threats from people who didn't tolerate failure. "He's not just living off you," Elise said. "He's running from something, and your parents are enabling him." My blood ran cold. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything I'd ever known about my family. The favoritism, the betrayals, the lies, all connected by a thread of denial and selfishness. I realized I wasn't the only one trapped in this mess. But what could I do? Fight a family that had already written me off? Or burn the whole house down? The darkness inside me wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about survival, about reclaiming myself from the wreckage they left behind. And so I made a choice. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to rise. The next morning, I sent a message to my parents. "This family is done. If you want to talk, meet me at the lawyer's office. Otherwise, don't bother." I didn't wait for their response, because for the first time, I was in control. But control is fragile, and sometimes the past comes back harder than you expect. The silence after my message was deafening. Days passed. No calls, no texts, nothing. My parents were playing the waiting game, or maybe they were too proud to admit defeat. But Jacob wasn't silent. He escalated. The insults turned sharper, his threats more direct. One night, I found a note slipped under my apartment door. Just 3 words. "You'll regret this." No signature, no clue who left it, but I knew. It was him. Fear crept in, but I swallowed it. I wasn't the scared kid anymore. Meanwhile, Elise became my lifeline. She fed me information, texts, photos, recordings, proof of Jacob's lies and betrayals. The more I learned, the more I understood how deep the rot went. Turns out, Jacob wasn't just a lazy leech. He was involved in something dangerous. Illegal dealings with people who didn't forgive mistakes. My parents? They knew, but chose to look away. One evening, as I was reviewing documents Elise had given me, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or someone gets hurt." My heart hammered. Was this a bluff or a warning? I was at a crossroads. I wanted justice, but didn't want to put anyone else in danger, especially not myself. But the thought of backing down? Impossible. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. Then, the unexpected happened. A knock at my door. It was my brother, Jacob. His face was a mix of desperation and anger. "I'm done running," he said, voice raw. "Let's fix this before it all falls apart." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the brother I once wished I had. But trust? That was gone years ago. I hesitated. Was this a trap? A ploy to weaken me? But I agreed to listen. Jacob spilled everything. The debts, the threats, the lies to our parents to keep them in the dark. He said he'd reached a breaking point. "I don't want to lose everything, not like this," he confessed. But the more he talked, the more I realized the depth of the damage. This wasn't just about money or pride. It was about survival. And now, I was caught in the middle. The next day, I met with Elise again. She warned me that if Jacob went public with what he'd told me, it could bring down everyone, my parents' reputation, our family's fragile peace. "I'm not sure who to trust anymore," I admitted. I started questioning everything. Was my fight for justice worth the price? Was I only trading one kind of pain for another? But then, a new piece fell into place. Elise showed me a photo, a shadowy figure lurking near my apartment, a warning or a promise. And just like that, the war wasn't just between siblings anymore. It was personal. The photo hit me like a punch to the gut, a blurry figure standing just outside my apartment building, half hidden in the shadows, watching. It wasn't just some random stalker or coincidence. It was deliberate. Someone wanted me to know I was being watched, tracked. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest, cold and heavy, like a noose tightening. From that moment on, nothing felt safe anymore. My mail arrived in disarray, some letters shuffled, others completely missing. My phone rang with increasing frequency, but every time I answered, there was only silence on the other end. I'd swear I caught glimpses of movement outside my windows late at night, shadows flitting past streetlights. Then came the day I returned home and found my apartment door left ajar. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. Just the unmistakable message that someone had been inside. Someone had been there while I wasn't. The terror wasn't just in what they might have taken or done. It was the knowledge that I was being toyed with, targeted. I went to my parents first, the only people I thought could stand beside me in this fight. But when I showed them the photo, the evidence of threats and intrusion, I saw something I hadn't expected before. Fear. Genuine, raw, crippling fear. My mother's face crumpled. Tears welled as she finally spoke. "You don't understand the stakes, Jonas. This family, our legacy, it's bigger than any of us. We've protected you and Jacob, kept secrets you weren't meant to know. The truth, It would destroy us all. Her words twisted in my gut. Legacy? What legacy could possibly justify lies, betrayal, and fear? What dark history was buried beneath their polished smiles and wealth? That night, sleep abandoned me. The apartment felt suffocating, walls closing in like a cage. The life I thought I knew was unraveling, thread by thread.
Days later, Roman called. His voice was sharp, cold, like ice sliding across broken glass. "You don't belong here, Jonas. You never did. You're a threat to everything we've built." Hearing that, I realized Roman had morphed from spoiled golden child into the family's ruthless enforcer, protector of secrets, executor of loyalty. And I was the loose thread they wanted to cut loose. His words were a warning, but beneath them, I heard something deeper: resentment, fear, maybe even desperation. Out of options, I reached back to Elise. She arranged a meeting with someone from the shadows, an insider with dirt on my parents and their empire. What I received was a dossier packed with evidence, bribes, illegal deals, threats, cover-ups, proof that the family's wealth and power were soaked in corruption. Holding the thick file, I felt the crushing weight of a choice that could ruin us all. Expose the family, destroy their empire, but lose everything I knew. Or stay silent, live with the poison, and be part of their lie. The fear wasn't just abstract anymore. Elise sent another photo, a figure lurking just outside my door, again, closer this time, watching. The game had changed. This was no longer about secrets or family drama. It was personal. It was dangerous. I began to question everything. Could I trust anyone? Was my family truly the monster I'd begun to see? Or was I just losing myself in the shadows they cast? The nights stretched long and cold. I'd lie awake listening for sounds, heart racing every time the phone buzzed or a shadow crossed the window. And then Roman came to me in person, not with threats, but with a chilling offer. "Join us," he said quietly, "or be destroyed." His eyes held a warning I couldn't ignore. The war wasn't just between us anymore. It was a battle for survival, power, control. That was the moment I realized I was no longer fighting just my family. I was fighting a monster born from the darkest parts of their past. The shadows were closing in, and the fight was just beginning. I reached out to Elise, desperate for allies. She arranged a meeting with someone who claimed to have dirt on our parents' empire, evidence that could bring them down, but at a terrifying cost. That's when I realized this wasn't just about family drama. This was survival, and I was caught in the crossfire. Holding those damning documents felt like clutching a grenade with the pin pulled. Every paper, every photo, every recording screamed betrayal. Not just of me, but of everyone they claimed to love. The family facade I'd lived under was nothing more than a house of cards built on lies, corruption, and fear. I sat alone in my small apartment late into the night, the weight of what I held threatening to crush me. Expose them, and I would burn down the only family I had. Stay silent, and I'd be complicit, another cog in their twisted machine. The choice wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. Mine. The lawyer I'd hired months earlier, initially just for small matters, became my ally, my shield. We planned carefully. Every move had to be precise. I wasn't just challenging a family. I was challenging an empire. When we met in that stark office overlooking the city, I laid the evidence on the table. The lawyer's face hardened as she sifted through it all. "This will ruin them," she said, voice steady, "but it will set you free." The fallout was worse than I imagined. My parents severed every tie immediately, their messages cold and final. Roman, my brother, and once my tormentor, publicly branded me a traitor, the black sheep,
the son who dared defy the family legacy. Jacob vanished into the shadows, too entangled in his own downfall to even retaliate. I was cut loose from the only people I'd ever known, but strangely, I felt lighter than I ever had. Freedom was bitter, but it was mine. Yet the solitude cut deep. With family torn apart and all bridges burned, the silence was deafening. One night, when the loneliness clawed at me hardest, a letter arrived, handwritten and trembling with raw emotion. It was from Jacob. He confessed everything: the debts he hid, the lies he spun, the poison he'd spread inside the family to protect himself. But beyond the admission, he begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right, not just with me, but with the broken pieces of our family. Reading his words, I felt the old wounds pulse again. Could I trust him? Could I risk opening myself to the brother who had caused so much pain? But somewhere in that plea, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years: remorse, a fragile hope. It made me realize something crucial. Family wasn't just blood or wealth. It was about who stayed when the world collapsed, who fought for you when no one else would. The days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to rebuild, not just a life, but a self I could finally recognize and respect. I found new allies outside the bloodline, friends who saw me for me, opportunities I never dared dream of when I was trapped in that toxic cycle. And though the past would always haunt me, the betrayals, the silence, the anger, I learned that survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about creating something new from the ashes. One quiet evening, I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker. The phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. "Whenever you're ready, we can start again." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't delete it either. Maybe the hardest battles aren't against others. Maybe they're the ones we fight within ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest victory is not burning the past down, but building something stronger in its place. One quiet evening, I sat by my window watching the city lights flicker. The phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. "Whenever you're ready, we can start again." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't delete it either. Maybe the hardest battles aren't against others. Maybe they're the ones we fight within ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest victory is not burning the past down, but building something stronger in its place.